Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, former BC cabinet minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host and the most prominent political commentator in Lions Bay, BC. Welcome to the show, Rafe.
I love that line.
Well,
actually, we're full of political commentators in this village.
Rafe, the Duffy trial is now recessed until after the federal election. Is this something fishy, or does it just look that way?
Well, it certainly looks that way. I mean, you can't say that it is fishy, but one of my colleagues asked me, I didn't know about it a few days ago, and said, what do you think? And I said, well, it's going to look to the public like the fix is in. Now, whether it is or not, Jim, that's dangerous territory to get on, but it certainly is very, very convenient for the Prime Minister.
Yes, I would think that Canadian judges are very honest men, and very rarely have they been proved to be different than that. It's just, I think what happened with the Duffy trial, more testimony lasted longer than expected, because I know when you start a trial, lawyers and judges try to set dates that are reasonable, but you can't expect the unexpected or anticipate it.
Well, that's correct, and I don't suggest the judge did anything wrong. If there was any sort of collusion, it would be between counsel, and I don't see. I don't know of any. All I can say is that it's remarkable. I think the judges, basically in this country, are fair, and I think they try to do the best they can. They sit down with counsel, of course, in cases like this, and try to estimate the time and the number of witnesses and so on. But if it's a short trial, I've been through lots of them, as you know, if it's a short trial, 2 or 3 days, you can do that. But when you get up to something that goes into the weeks, you just never know. Witnesses die, witnesses change their testimony, or some witnesses take longer than they thought, some take shorter. You just never know.
On the testimony that you heard, so many high officials in the Prime Minister's office saying, I never read the email, or I didn't read all of it. Would you keep that kind of a person around your office?
Well, I think that is just preposterous, and I think that the Canadian public see it that way. To think that the Prime Minister didn't know, he of all Prime Ministers wouldn't know when all of his senior staff do, and the ones that don't say, oh my goodness, I didn't look at an email. Jim, that's just beyond belief. We've been around a little while, and that kind of stuff just does not happen. People might say it happens for convenient reasons, but I have no doubt whatsoever that Harper knew all about this, and it wouldn't have been such a big issue if he had said so. It's become a big issue because he's trying to pretend he didn't. And, Jim, you've watched politics a while. When you start to pretend things didn't happen that did, sooner or later it gets you. And just to digress for a second, it's same with this health fuss in Victoria with the fired people and the suicide and so on. If they had immediately put in a proper adjudicator of that problem, a proper panel, then the problem will be over. But they've gone on and on and on and on. Number one, more people know about it than ever knew about it before. Number two, sooner or later the truth comes out, and it looks a lot worse when it comes out a long time after it should have.
I think people are very forgiving, and so often we see this with celebrities. They do something bad, and right away, if they apologize, people tend to forgive them, and a year later, they're just as popular as they ever were.
Well, people forget about it when that happens, and this is it's one of the cardinal rules of politics that this provincial government doesn't seem to understand, and that's to pull the bandage off as quickly as you can. Now, I'm bound to say this, Jim. They don't have to understand. There's no opposition. There's nobody to take over. Horgan's enthralled to the LNG industry, and along they go. No matter what Christie and her cohorts do, there's nobody there that's looking any better. And so she's able to get away with these things. But in a normal situation in British Columbia, that in the days of yore, when there were two parties really hammering it out toe to toe, and the one that was out in opposition was truly a government in waiting, then these things were a lot different. But you couldn't get away with these things. But what this woman and her cohorts get away with is just from an old politician, I just itch to be in the opposition for a while. I mean, you just actually your cup would runneth over. It's just so much.
Well, maybe you'd like to be back in government again. No one's going to question what you do. Just sign an order in council and go away on holidays for 10 months.
Well, that's right. Maybe I could do that now if I don't have to work. That's my problem now. I'm kind of bedridden. If I don't have to work, why not become the premier?
Getting back to the federal election, we have the conservatives saying we have a balanced budget, although the watchdog for the budget says no, they don't. The NDP says we won't run a deficit, and Mr. Trudeau says, yes, we will run a deficit, but why not build infrastructure when interest rates are at record lows?
Well, it's interesting, budgets sometimes are very high priority in the minds of Canadians, and we've been through these where the economy is really, how can I put it? Back in the days when Mr. Trudeau Sr. was running up deficit and so on, they were a big deal. But people don't seem to pay that much attention to them now. The one that I would be concerned about is Mulcair, because they're hammering him now on the basis that he's understating the amount he's going to have to need and so on. And there's a deep-seated feeling amongst a lot of Canadians that the NDP really don't know much about that sort of thing anyway, and maybe this is a sign of lack of competence. So that's an area that Mulcair wants to look good. He wants to make sure he repairs those things very, very quickly, because that's where he is particularly vulnerable. But I don't think that the public is going to decide this election based on that, unless Mulcair continues to not be able to deal with the questions, and unless it suddenly becomes an issue where I don't think it is yet.
The bank, CIBC, said elect anybody but the NDP because they'll be bad for business and bad for the Canadian economy. Should the banks be stepping into this?
Well, first of all, banks are the last people in the world that should be getting into that kind of an argument, given their record over the years. No, I hear this all the time, Jim. I can remember in 1975 and 72 when the NDP came in, everybody would leave the province, and then when they came back in, when it was in 91, everybody was going to flee the province. This sort of stuff is always said. It's nonsense. They said it about Alberta when Ms. Notley got in, and of course it hasn't happened, and I don't think people buy that anymore. There are people who are always going to say it. The usual suspects will come up and say it, but by and large, I don't think people pay much attention to that. The problem with the NDP in British Columbia has got absolutely nothing to do with competence in terms of business. It's got in terms of competence in politics. They've forgotten that their job is to oppose. And, I've written about this, Jim, as recently as today in the Common Sense Canadian and last week. There's a misunderstanding amongst a lot of people about this. It doesn't matter if the NDP thinks the government idea is a good one, unless it's a motherhood issue. You oppose it, and you oppose it because you want to make them prove not only is it good in principle, but it's good in every detail. Now, if they do that to your satisfaction, when the vote comes, you vote in favor. I had that happen to me a lot of times when I was doing consumer legislation. The NDP would actually like the legislation, but they'd hammer the hell out of me during the time I was presenting the bill, because they had to make sure that what I was saying was accurate, and that I said was going to happen, and then they would support it. But you can't do, as Horgan has done, for example, with LNG. You can't just say, oh no, we're going to support that. Look what's happened. They cannot oppose fracking. They can't get involved in the current thing on fracking and earthquakes that's a story today. They can't get in on LNG plants themselves or the transportation tankers. They can't oppose any of those things because they've already said they're in favor. And now they've got, of all places, Saanich, which is an area that is very close to a lot of NDP territory, and they've got to remain silent. Now, I harken back, I guess I show my age a lot, but I harken back to the days of Dave Barrett and Bob Williams and those kind of people. They'd be going absolutely off the wall on this, and so they should. And this is just not happening. And the comment I made today in my article, which you may like, in days of yore, when there was a federal election, the NDP national leader would have to tiptoe in British Columbia so that he didn't defend the NDP provincial policies. Well, since they don't have any provincial policies with the NDP provincially, Mulcair doesn't have to worry. This is a practical thing. Mulcair doesn't have to talk about LNG. He doesn't have to talk about wood fiber, doesn't have to talk about Sanogen or any of those things because he's not going to offend the NDP one way or the other. So these have practical implications, and the old saying of Lord Randolph Churchill back in the 1880s is still very true today. Under a parliamentary system, it's the duty of the opposition to oppose, plain and simple.
We'll have more with Rafe Mair right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rafe Mair. Rafe, how would you rate the federal parties on how they're dealing with BC issues, such as the closure of the Kitsilano Coast Guard base or the removal of funding for Vancouver's high-angle rescue team?
Well, this is interesting, Jim, because the only one who really seems to be au fait with BC issues and understand them is the one person that's not going to be able to do anything about it, and that's Elizabeth May. And I have watched her, read her, listened to her, etc., and she has got an excellent grasp, has got good policies. The others really, they don't understand this place. This is kind of a spinny province to them, and they don't really care. Trudeau says he understands the province because he went to school here, and his mom was from here, and of course he has that terrible tragedy that happened in British Columbia. But once they get back across the mountains, they don't understand. And the obvious one is Harper on the 12 or 15 million or whatever he gave to salmon. Now listen to this, folks. This is the same guy that can't get farm salmon in here fast enough. So the faster he is putting money in to help the salmon, he's destroying them even faster than that with fish farms. And it's the federal government, and I say this on every party that's been in, Jim, the federal government since 1871 when we came into Confederation has never understood British Columbia. They have never understood fishing, never understood the salmon particularly, and that's why the industry has steadily gone downhill. The problem with the federal fisheries ministry except from time to time when somebody like John Fraser was in very, very briefly, the trouble with them is they neither know nor care nor understand anything about the particular fishery. They think a salmon is a salmon, and it isn't. And so this is it's frustrating to me because I've lived here all my life, and I'm overwhelmingly in love with this place and the salmon. And when I hear people that just coming from Ottawa that want my vote and talking about salmon for 5 minutes and running away, it's just not good enough. So you asked me a question that's very, very difficult to answer. I don't know that any of them, other than Ms. May, really do understand. Now, here is one interesting thing that I'll put on the table. I haven't heard anybody really raise this issue. The Prime Minister, Harper, has said in the most eloquent terms there will be no LNG tankers on the East Coast. None. No, finished. Terrible things. All such bad things that happen. Yet he can't get enough of them on the West Coast. Now, surely to God, some politician's going to raise that. No, I suspect they don't want to talk about that because they don't want to get national unity into the mix, and they don't want to pick up the cudgels of idiots like Rafe Mair who are always sounding like a separatist. So, it's very different. You ask a question of me, a dedicated, passionate British Columbian, that's very, very hard to answer. I don't see any of them, of the three main ones, that really are doing anything for BC or understand the province.
Do you think sometimes British Columbians feel closer to Washingtonians across the border who have legalize marijuana and have the same kind of issues we have about the environment?
Well, I think sometimes we do. I'm a passionate British Columbian, and I've said publicly before, so I don't mind saying it again. I'm a British Columbian before I'm anything else. But I don't want to join the United States, and I don't think deep down most people do. But there's no doubt about it. There are a lot of tempting features about Washington. The trouble with Washington State is if you ever join them, you have to join the whole lot with all of the problems they've got throughout the country. And you wind up with President Trump, and nobody really wants to have that problem on their hands. But there's no doubt about it. You look elsewhere and you think, wait a minute, how come these things that are happening in B.C. aren't happening in Washington or Oregon or California or those places? And it's very tempting to bitch about it.
Maybe we could become a territory of Washington State.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we should go back and revisit the treaties, because we really should be right down on the Columbia River. You know, if we got a square deal from the Brits at the time, but that would be nice.
Rafe, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Always my pleasure, Jim. Thanks for having me.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, former BC cabinet minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Find us on YouTube as well. Our channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.